If you're looking to enter IT in this day and age, you need to have a natural curiosity for starters. If you don't have that natural curiosity, that desire to learn, to understand how things work, to solve problems, to come up with that problem solution, then IT is not necessarily the right fit for you. But if you're curious, if you're always kind of tinkering, if you really want to understand the root cause of something, then I think IT could be a great fit for you. You don't have to be a math nerd like myself or a science, have a bent for science. Natural curiosity combined with hard work will allow anybody to enter and succeed in IT, in my opinion.
I'm Tony Volpicello. This is the Career Jigsaw. Welcome to another Season 2 episode. I am thrilled you joined us today as we present another industry spotlight. And as always, our goal is simple: give you great advice to the very best of our ability. So without further ado, let's go! Today's industry spotlight will be on IT, aka information technology. I've known today's guest for over 20 years, and I am thrilled to have him join today's podcast. For privacy reasons, we are leaving last names out of today's episode. From New York, New York, Boston, Mass, and Miami, Florida, welcome Lee. Lee, please share a little bit about yourself with our listeners.
Hi, Tony. Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to join you in the discussion today. So I started off as a little bit of I don't want to say a prodigy, but I had a real knack for math and sciences, and I just kind of went down that track and ended up in college landing a degree in computer science. And that led me from one job to another. And like you mentioned, hopped cities a little bit, working in some different, very, very interesting companies, businesses, and industries, but always in the IT area of businesses. And that really led me to a lot of different experiences along the way, up and down ladders, and look forward to talking to you a little bit today about anything that I might have learned that other people maybe can benefit from and hopefully avoid some of the mistakes I made along the way.
Oh, awesome. Thanks for sharing that and for getting us started. So I'm going to dive right in. Got a ton of questions for you. So my first one's pretty obvious. What led you to a career in IT? And did you target it? Did you fall into it? Or were you inspired to enter the field?
That's a great question. So, funny story. I remember when I was getting near the end of college and actually had just about to finish up my degree in computer science and had a conversation actually with my grandfather. I had a real thing for photography, loved photography, and was trying to decide, do I go with this computer science thing? And I won't tip my hat on my age, but let's just say the IT field looked a little different back then than it does now. And most people didn't even really understand what the IT industry was at that point. It was very kind of ethereal and only applied to really big businesses. There was just not a lot known. And during that conversation, I said, I really love photography. And he said, you know what? You can always do photography as a hobby, and that way you'll always love it. But there's probably some kind of future in this computer thing. So I decided, all right, let me give it a shot, and got my first job working for a semiconductor company up in the Boston area, working with some complicated engineering stuff in the IT world. And that kind of launched me down the path. And then as I went down that path, really, it was just a series of events that led me to evolve my career over time.
Well, considering where computers and IT have come, I would say, of course, I think you made a wise choice. I'm also curious if you had chosen photography more as the primary, given that industry. And although digitally photography is doing incredibly well, what it was 20, 30 years ago versus now might be a very different story. All right, so I'm going to ask you to kind of flash back, but start from today. in looking at your career, so when you think about where you are today, what, if any, were the pivotal moments or decisions in your career that got you to where you are today?
That's a great question, and there are many of them, but I'll tell you that one sticks out more than others, and it was a taxi cab ride in Melville, New York. I was doing some work for a big bank in the Melville area, and for those who are familiar with how you get to work when you're taking the train, I would take the LIRR, get off the train, and you could take a taxi cab to get to where you're going from the train, and it was a little bit before Uber, but they have this concept of shared taxi cabs. And you kind of get around a bunch of people and the drivers figure out who's going where, and you get with a group of people that are going to similar areas. I was going to an area along with another fella, and we started chatting. Turns out, funny enough, we were actually chatting about playing golf at a course down in the Florida area, Key Biscayne, and struck up a conversation. And fast forward, he said, that's what you do. This is what I do. I have a company, et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk about maybe you could come work for me. And sure enough, I ended up switching and working for him. And this was a consulting firm in New York City. And that really, as small of an event as that was, an innocent taxi cab ride, just going to work at a client, and really shifted the trajectory of the type of work that I did, set me down a consulting path that I honestly would never have anticipated going down. And it was such a great fit for where I was at the time in terms of my career development and the skill set that I had at the time, which was a cross between some real hands-on technical skills as well as the ability to conceptualize a solution, what some might call solution design later on in life. That concept evolved a bit, as well as the ability to interact and work with clients, which really was kind of the first starting points of what led me to where I'm at today, which is in the project management side of IT.
Wow, that is an awesome story. I have a quick follow-up question. After that cab ride and you had that decision to make, was it an easy one?
Absolutely. Never even batted an eye for 1 second.
Wow.
And I think a lot of times, people make decisions with their head. Some people make them with their heart, some kind of from the gut. And it all made perfect sense to me. Never even thought twice about it for a second.
I'm a big believer that things happen for a reason. So that feels like one of those moments. All right, my next question. When I think about teachers and doctors, I think it's fair to say that the rewards in those careers could be fairly obvious. So I'm curious for you, IT, what's been the most rewarding part of your career so far?
That's really interesting. So there's two big sides to what I do. One is just the straight technology side. And there's a reward in coming up with something that's, I'll say, technologically cool. I came up with some designs. I worked with teams that came up with solutions that really rival some of the technology that's in the marketplace today. But we put out much, much earlier in terms of time, and a whole different, a long time ago, we came up with solutions that are kind of just now taking root. So the actual technology itself is really cool. If you like that, for me, that was one of the rewards. But that was in and of itself wasn't enough to sustain me in the career. What I really kind of spoke to me longer term and more consistently over my career is how technology impacted people's ability to do their job. When I got to see somebody who was struggling with their business, whether it's building staircases and floors, to coming up with detailed analytics across complex markets, very different types of businesses and areas, but seeing how people could use technology that I had a hand in putting in place, and it made their jobs, their businesses, their profitability much better. It gave them insights that they never would have had before. I've seen people do these processes that took hours, days, weeks, months. With the right technology in place, it gets cut down to seconds and minutes. And seeing that kind of change that I thought was really cool.
I think that is very cool to be able to think first back on your first answer of the problem solving piece was something you got a kick out of. And then later on, what I might call the enablement piece, helping people do their jobs better, stronger, faster. Again, I think is very cool. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. So this podcast is all about giving great advice where we can. So for you, what advice would you give to someone looking to enter IT?
If you're looking to enter IT in this day and age, you need to have a natural curiosity, for starters. If you don't have that natural curiosity, that desire to learn, to understand how things work, to solve problems like you mentioned, Tony, to come up with that problem solution, then IT is not necessarily the right fit for you. But if you're curious, if you're always kind of tinkering, if you really want to understand the root cause of something, then I think IT could be a great fit for you. You don't have to be a math nerd like myself or a science, have a bent for science. Natural curiosity combined with hard work will allow anybody to enter and succeed in IT, in my opinion.
Nice. Really, really well said, Lee. I appreciate that. Thank you. So I'm going to ask you again to maybe go back in time a bit and share with our listeners the benefit of your long career. And I know your age, but I'll keep it a secret, but I know you're very experienced. What do you wish you had known when you first started your career that you know now?
Oh, if I could go back in time, the proverbial DeLorean that I know you love, I don't know. I don't think that there's a whole lot that I would really do differently. I look back, I'm pretty pleased with the evolution of my career in line with the evolution of myself. I think when you grow as a person, your career grows over time. The journey is unique to every individual. And I'm thrilled with where I am in life right now. I'm lucky, I'm blessed, I'm so thankful. And I wouldn't be here without the experiences that got me here. So I really wouldn't change a ton.
I think that's very fair and in some ways refreshing to hear. So thanks for sharing that. I know this question's going to be a tough one given the industry, but I have to ask it. Where do you see IT evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh my God, incredible. I wish I could really confidently answer that question and put my money behind the companies that are doing whatever that thing is. Because if you look at simply how companies and stocks have done, that the Googles, the Amazons, go back in time, look at Dell, they reshaped computers. I believe everyone's heard of Apple. They've done okay recently as well. So there've been so many. It's an industry that's constantly changing. And the more obvious things these days that are in the future, that are in everybody's sights right now, are like artificial intelligence. That's the big one. What is AI going to do? How is AI going to change people's jobs? Is that going to be the next thing that really makes the big splash? So that's probably the big one. I don't see IT really revolutionizing. I think we're at a point now where it's more evolution rather than revolution. Whereas in the past, it was more revolution. When they came up with miniaturization of hard drives, when they came up with developing memory, there's some great stories about Bill Gates saying, why would anybody ever need X amount of RAM? That's ridiculous. This is all they ever need. But there's this concept called Moore's Law where processor speed doubles every 8, or either doubles or 10 times every 18 months. So as the underlying technologies evolve, whether it's the hardware that runs the computers, the miniaturization of silicon wafers, the improved algorithms that drive artificial intelligence, the massive storage, the cloud computing, there's so much work happening in the cloud now. So it's a lot of evolution in different areas. I don't see one specific piece though, although honestly, I wish I could. I wish I did. I'd be you could become a very, very wealthy person if you pick the next big thing.
Any predictions?
Ooh. I wish I had one, but I really don't have one. I think it's just going to be an evolution of good, strong companies that do well and enable the insurance companies, enable the banks, enable the other businesses that make lots and lots of money, because at the end of the day, those companies that make lots of money and invest in IT, those are the ones that drive and benefit most from change.
Fair enough. And I appreciate you touching a bit on AI. I think we're all curious where it goes, how is it applied, will it lead to the next Terminator? But that's a conversation for another time. But I'll share, I've already seen tremendous value for me in day-to-day and just being able to do things like this podcast. It has helped me tremendously in preparation and homework. So definitely has its place. Just curious where it lands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, to just touch a little bit more on that, think about what Zoom did to the world, with the technologies that enable Zoom. And people think of that as its own technology. But that also rides on top of the ability for bits and bytes to move at speeds and volume that would never have been imaginable 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So all of the infrastructure from, bottom to top to bottom, side to side, that enable the cool solutions, AI wouldn't be possible without massive processing, without massive data storage, without the internet, massive amounts of data across the world. So there's so many layers to IT and that's one of the other things I think that makes it interesting for me, is it is so kind of textured and multi-layered, and there's so much to learn in so many different areas and avenues of it.
Interesting point. I mean, again, that gets back to the enablement piece for something like AI. Really, really, really fascinating. What's the one thing about your job? And I know, we talked a lot about IT. Your day-to-day job is project management within IT. What's the one thing about your job that might surprise people?
Oh, so I think people would be surprised to really understand how many different specialties and teams there are within the IT universe, and how many of those different disciplines have to come together to just keep the lights on running at any business, to deliver any solution, anything that you work with, that phone that you have in your hand, that car that you're driving in right now. The number of people and the number of different areas that people had to go deep to study in is absolutely staggering. The ability to bring together all of these very highly specialized disciplines to deliver any type of IT that you use, whether it's the car you're driving in, the phone you're using, any of those things, that when you log on to, you open an app, you play Candy Crush. Any of those things that you use that involve technology required so many different hands in the pot. It's very complicated. And I think if anybody who's not living in that world had a peek behind the curtain, how many different individuals with the numbers of skills that they needed to deliver that, if they saw that, I think that would be quite eye-opening.
Yeah, I think we take it for granted that all this happens so easily without the resources. I've heard many a comedian kind of poke fun at how often we take for granted the cell phone and the technology that we use. And when it doesn't work all that well, we tend again to just not appreciate what we have. So great insight. So let's talk to some of the college grads out there that might be listening to the podcast, or those just entering the workforce. Are there any books or resources, podcasts, courses that you would recommend to someone wanting to learn more about IT?
In terms of resources out there to learn about IT, I really haven't seen any magical books out there, magical podcasts, because IT is such a broad field. It's tough to really kind of point somebody to something that will give them that insight. The only thing that jumps to mind would be, may sound silly and it's a little old school in the IT world, but Wired Magazine. Wired Magazine to me has been the one consistent and I would say interesting, remaining current, remaining relevant, bringing interesting ideas, talking about where, industry trends, what's happening. So if I had to point to one thing, I'd probably say as kind of simple as it is, Wired Magazine is still very, very solid.
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation. Thanks for sharing that. All right, we talked about a lot. My listeners know my goal is to always keep this discussion around 20 minutes. I think we're right around that 20-minute point. So, Lee, I'm going to turn it back to you for any final thoughts.
I'm lucky to have had the opportunity, the skills, and the ability to enter the IT world at a time where there was so much change and so much happening and going on, to have lived through Y2K. And yes, for those who question, was Y2K real? Yes, it was real. I was literally updating code that's running some very serious systems that would have had major problems had those changes not been made ahead of Y2K. So having the ability, the fortune to have lived through that and been a part of it has been an honor, a pleasure, and it's been a great ride. And I would just say, hey, enjoy your ride. Your ride is unique to you, and have fun. Whatever you choose to do, wherever you choose to go, have a good time. You only get one shot at this. Make the most of it. Have fun.
Awesome advice. I think the Y2K analogy is a great one, considering we all thought of it as a dud. Meanwhile, what really happened was the preparation and the work to get there was a huge success. But man, I love the passion in your voice. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your insights, and allowing us to go a little bit deeper on IT. Thank you so much, my friend. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tony. It's been an honor.
Well, podcast people, that is a wrap. Thank you so much for listening in today. If you like what you heard, keep listening, follow us, etc. You know the drill. And also check out our website at thecareerjigsaw.com. Again, thanks so much for tuning in, and more to come next week. Be safe, all.